Hello, friends. Welcome to this 37th webinar on the Secret Doctrine. As most of you know by now, this webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheadings Moria Federation webinars, then webinar series in progress as shown here. Both this and the Secret Teachings series are also now available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald, Secret Doctrine, or Secret Teachings. We'll start by checking in on HPB's travels as described in old diary leaves. Last month, we read about Colonel Olcott, who, during a speaking tour in southern Ceylon, continued to heal the infirm by means of his mesmeric healing techniques. In this reading, Olcott gains further insight into these techniques. So could we get a reader?
Martha, can you read that for us, please? There
Yes,
you go.
I'm looking for, oh, here we are. Okay. The secret of successful mesmeric healing was revealed to me by an experience I had at a small village in southern Ceylon. I think it was at Pitiwala at Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, 5 miles from Gale, though I'm not sure, having failed to record the case apart from others treated on the same day. My interpreter, secretary, and servant, together with many other witnesses, will be able to recall the facts if my word is challenged, so it does not matter. A man suffering from hemiplegia, or paralysis of one side, was brought to me for treatment. I began on his arm, making passes along the nerves and muscles, and occasionally breathing upon him. In less than a half hour, I had restored the arm to flexibility, so much so that he could whirl his arm around his head, open and close his fingers at will, grasp and hold a pen or even a pin, and in fact do anything he liked with the limb. Then, as I had been kept continuously at work on similar cases for several hours and felt tired, I bade the community to make him take a seat and give me time to rest. While I was smoking a pipe, the committee told me that the patient was well-to-do, had spent 1,500 rupees on medical men without getting relief, and was an avaricious person well known for his closeness. Now, of all things that are disgusting to the occultist, money greed is one of the chief. It was so low and ignoble a passion.
Thank you, Martha. And, oops, going up one. Here we go. Another reader, please.
Joe, can you read that for us, please?
Certainly. My feelings underwent an instant change towards the patient. The committee, at my suggestion, asked him how much he had decided to give towards the Buddhist National Fund for Schools. He whined out that he was a poor man and had spent much on doctors, but he would give 1 rupee. That capped the climax. I told them to say to him that although he had spent 1,500 rupees in vain, he had now had his arm cured gratis, and he might now spend an equal sum and see if the doctors would not cure his paralyzed leg. And he had better keep the rupee he had just offered for Buddhist schools towards the doctor's fees. I told him to take the creature away and never let me see him again. But the committee, with one accord, begged me to recall my order, as the mere mention of money would assuredly be misconstrued and misrepresented by our bitter opponents. Who could not say that I had ever taken a cent for my healings, or that they had been made by the Buddhist committee an excuse to influence subscriptions? So after a while, I had the patient brought before me, and within another half hour had released his leg from its state of paralysis and sent the man away walking as well as anyone. My secretary took from him, it seems, a certificate of the cure, and I had it among the papers connected with that Ceylon tour.
Thank you, Joe. And our last reading.
Okay, let me do it. The committee in charge of my work had arranged a series of loop tours of about a fortnight each, which brought me around each time to Gaul, the central point. When this particular one was finished, I was asking one day how it had fared with a certain few patients whose cases had more particularly interested me than the rest, and among others, I mentioned this miser's. The reply surprised me very much. The arm, they said, remained cured, but the leg had relapsed into paralytic state. Although I had read of no similar case in the books on mesmerism, the reason suggested itself at once. I had felt no real sympathy for the man after hearing about his miserliness, and therefore my vital aura had not vibrated along his nerves as it had when applied to the nerves of his arm. There had been a momentary healthful stimulus followed by a return to the state of nerve paralysis. In both cases, I had had exactly the same knowledge of the science and the same measure of vital force to transmit, but in the latter, none of that feeling of sympathy and benevolent intent which, in the case of the arm, resulted in a pure permanent cure. I am aware that some writers on psychopathy, among them younger, whose work appeared 5 years later than my Ceylon experience, have affirmed that sympathy is the keynote of nearly all phases of development of the mesmeric state. But I do not recall an instance like the one above cited.
Thanks, BL. Okay, interesting stuff. So we ended our last session with a lively discussion on this DK quote, which tells us that the planes rotate from east to west and the rays rotate from north to south, and that it is by means of this dual interaction that the work of the four lords of karma is made possible. This brings up the question, how does this dual rotation enable the Lapika lords to, quote, do their work? One possible, though only partial answer, for those Lapika lords working with future karma, we might suppose that certain opportunities for change and growth would come through specific plane ray alignments. And for those Lapika lords working with past karma, opportunities better suited for dissolving karma could be determined during, that ray plane alignment. And considering a different topic altogether, it seems only logical that the ray cycles given in Esoteric Psychology Volume 1 are in some way expressive of this dual rotation of planes and rays. Any thoughts or questions about any of this material? Finally, we have the quote, quaternary and all sum totals of 4 can be seen as one of the basic combinations of matter, producing by the dual revolutions of planes and rays, possibly suggesting that matter itself is produced by this dual rotation, or at least, quote, one of the basic combinations of matter. Any thoughts or questions about any of this? We might hypothesize from this statement that all matter, including the physical sheaths of human beings, are driven into form through the action of this dual rotation, making it, if this hypothesis is correct, the driving force behind incarnation. This is a revolutionary thought, so to speak. And since karma functions as a result of cyclic incarnation, the tie between this dual rotation and the Lapika lords begins to become more apparent. Clearly, the effects of this dual ray plane rotation is a field of study in and of itself.
Francis.
Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, the rotation of the planes, when we talk about east to west, we could perhaps consider that as symbolic of horizontal, and rotating from
Absolutely.
north to south could be considered symbolically as vertical. From an esoteric standpoint, vertical is spirit to matter. From a esoteric standpoint, horizontal is how do you describe within a series of between person to person or soul to soul, rather than the vertical spirit to matter.
I see.
So
Great.
rather than considering them as a physical constraint, very concrete minded type of thing, but
Right.
more symbolical.
Yeah, well, certainly. Yeah, I think he even says in his description that it can be seen as symbolic because these directions only exist as they demonstrate on the physical plane here in the three worlds of human endeavor, right? Very specifically on the physical plane. So yeah, and I think you're considering what we were just talking about with the idea that somehow these drive form into being, right? That we could see that especially that north to south downward rotated, the downward part of the cycle would indeed, drive substance in its noumenal stage into a material manifestation and then back out. So it could be seen as a kind of life-death cycle, right? In that way. Good point.
Thank you.
Francis?
Yeah.
Carrie asks, what matter is formed when a ray is out of manifestation?
Well, certainly matter that would not be as fundamentally conditioned by that ray. Just how that would look is hard to say. But for instance, the fourth ray is not in manifestation right now. Well, the entire human kingdom is under the influence of the fourth ray. It's one of the two major rays, fourth and fifth, that determine its qualitative nature and its MO, its way of becoming, right? So you can't say that because the fourth ray, here, let me go back. Yeah, it's a fourth ray, which is to come slowly into manifestation after 2025. You can't say that there's no, in fact, DK says as much, that there's no fourth ray influence because it's inherent, right? But in terms of, for instance, fourth ray souls manifesting, this cycle definitely does control that. And DK also says something to that effect, that you don't see many, if any, fourth ray souls in manifestation at this time, and that they will come in beginning in 2025. So that's just some insight on it. It's certainly not a complete answer.
Francis?
Yeah.
Martha says that doesn't DK say that when he speaks of out of manifestation, that doesn't mean it isn't present. It's simply not dominant.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. How far out of manifestation? I tend to think of the three worlds of human endeavor, physical, astral, and mental, as being the manifested realms, right? But of course, so for instance, if you wouldn't find opportunity in this time, if you're a fourth ray soul, to manifest. You wouldn't occur, right? But of course you exist. You're present, as you say, Martha. You know, but you wouldn't be manifest. That's how I see it. You know, from another point of view, the entire cosmic physical plane is a manifestation, right? But I think, you know, when he's talking about these ray cycles, he's, as I understand it, talking about the triple manifestation in physical, astral, and mental levels. Yeah, anyone else? Okay, so a word about how the image shown here relates to the Lepikas. And Michael touched on this. First, it symbolically delineates the four quarters of the sky, which I've emboldened there at the bottom, the four quarters of Lepika influence. Second, if we imagine this to be a three-dimensional figure, it can be seen as indicating the dual rotation of planes and rays, with the vertical arm representing the north to south axis of the ray rotation, and the horizontal arm the east-west axis of the plane rotation. It's noteworthy that the symbol, the circumscribed fixed cross, is also the symbol for the third logos, with which the Lepika lords are intimately associated. So any thoughts or questions about before we leave this page? Okay, let's reread the first paragraph of commentary on verse 6, which we were sort of in the middle of at the end of our last session. The verse itself reads, "Then the second seven, who are the Lepika, produced by the three, word, voice, and spirit. The rejected son is one. The son's sons are countless." So could we get a reader for this first paragraph to reread?
Scott, can you read that for us, please? We're self-muted. There you
How
go.
about that? The Lipika, from the word lipi, writing, means literally the scribes. The footnote says there are four immortals. These are the four immortals which are mentioned in Atharva Veda as the watchers or guardians of the four quarters of the sky. Mystically, these divine beings are connected with karma, the law of retribution, for they are the recorders or analysts who impress on the, to us, invisible tablets of the astral light, the great picture gallery of eternity, a faithful record of every act and every thought of man, of all that was, is, or ever will be in the phenomenal universe. As said in Isis, this divine and unseen canvas is the book of life. As it is the Lupika who project into objectivity from the passive universal mind the ideal plan of the universe, upon which the builders reconstruct the cosmos after every pralaya. It is they who stand parallel to the seven angels of the presence, whom the Christians recognize in the seven planetary spirits, or the spirits of the stars. For thus it is they who are the direct omnisciences of the eternal ideation, or as it's called by Plato, the divine thought. Amanuensis.
Amanuensis.
Thank you. I knew it was there. I
You were
knew that
dancing
one.
all around it. Exactly.
There you go.
Right. So that's, you know, AAB was an amanuensis of decay, right? It's a recorder. And of course, we know that about the Lepika. So any thoughts or questions about the first half of this long paragraph? It's a basic tenet of theosophy that the Lepikas are wielders of the law of karma, and that accounts are kept in the Akashic records, called in HPB's day the astral light. In Isis Unveiled, this, quote, divine and unseen canvas is called the Book of Life. DK gives us further insight on the subject. Can we get a reader, please?
Michael, can you read that for us, please?
All are graded and charted. The masters have their halls of records, with a system of tabulation incomprehensible to us owing to its magnitude and its necessary intricacies, wherein these charts are kept. They are under the care of a Chohan of a ray, each ray having its own collection of charts. These charts, being in many sections, dealing with incarnate, discarnate, and perfected egos, are again all under the care of subordinate guardians. The Lapika lords, with their vast band of helpers, are the most frequent users of these charts. Many discarnate egos awaiting incarnation, or having just left the earth, sacrifice their time in heaven to assist in this work. These halls of records are mostly on the lowest levels of the mental plane and the highest of the astral, as they can be there most fully utilized and are most easily accessible.
Thank you, Michael. Any thoughts about this paragraph? You know, I mean,
Yes,
yeah, Michael.
yes.
Go ahead.
My wife Laurel had an experience where she essentially visited this hall of records, likening it to a vast library with stacks of books in all imaginable directions.
Wow, yeah. Incredible, huh? You know, I have to wax and my amazement here. Who could write this paragraph? Just think about that. I mean, who could really, with veracity, write this paragraph besides DK or possibly HPB? You know, something to think about. I mean, to know this is an extraordinary thing to me. Okay. Now I'm over it. But the Lapikas do even greater work, for it is they who, quote, project into objectivity from the passive universal mind the ideal plan of the universe, upon which the builders reconstruct the cosmos after every pralaya. Again, DK gives us a bit more info. Can we get a reader for this?
Yes. And Veronica, can you read that for us, please? And you can go ahead and, well, she just said, I want to go to that library. Just love it. I think
Okay.
many of us can say the same thing, Anne Veronica. Okay, go ahead. Can you read, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello. Another series of files in these records give, under a different formula, information as to what is esoterically called the heat content of any unit, the radiating light of any form, and the magnetic force of every life. It is through this knowledge that the Lipikas control the bringing in and the passing out of every life, divine, superhuman, solar, and human, and it is through a consideration of this formula, which is the basic formula for a solar system, that the physical plane appearance of a solar logos is controlled and the length of a cosmic pralaya settled.
Thank you, Aunt Veronica. So the heat content of any unit, the radiating light of any form, and the magnetic force of every life determines the birth or manifestation and death or obfuscation of every unit, from an atom of substance to a solar system. It seems to me that this info relates to this statement from HPB's verse 5 commentary, quote, heat, the breath, attraction, and repulsion, the three great factors of motion, are the conditions under which all the members of all this primitive family are born, developed, and die. So here's a comparison of the Secret Doctrine and Treatise on Cosmic Fire statements. We can see an obvious relation between the two sets of three, with the radiating light acting to repulse that which interferes with its radiation, and magnetic force acting as the attracting aspect of motion. From this, we might hypothesize that through a wielding of the triple function of motion, the Lepikas determined the, quote, bringing in and passing out of all units of consciousness. Of course, just how the Lepika lords use these potencies to enforce their karmic determinations and how this triple force relates to the dual rotation of the planes and rays remains a complete mystery. Next, it is they who stand parallel to the 7 angels of the presence, whom the Christians recognize in the 7 planetary spirits. Again, DK elaborates. This DK's elaboration also gives us a chance to look at these great paintings by different artists of the Lepika reality, or the Akashic record reality. Go ahead, can we get a reader for this, please?
Yeah. Malia, can you read that for us, please? You're self-muted. There you go.
Sorry, I've been noshing on nuts, so I hope I'm not too mushy. The
That's all
fourth
right.
creative hierarchy of human monads and the Lepika lords in their 3 groups, the threefold karmic rulers who stand between the solar logos and the 7 planetary logoi, are more closely allied than the other hierarchies, and their destinies are intimately interwoven. A further link lies in the fact that the 4 rays of mind, which concern the karma of the 4 planetary logoi in their totality, hold in their keeping the present evolutionary process for man, viewing him as the thinker. These 4, with the karmic 4 Lepika lords, work in the closest cooperation.
Thank you, Malia. So any thoughts or questions about this? We see in this passage a correlation to HPB's next statement. See if you can hold all this together. They are the direct amanuensis of the eternal ideation. And we're talking about the Lepika lords here, or is called by Plato the divine thought, which also relates to the previously stated, it is the Lepika who project into objectivity from the passive universal mind, the ideal plan of the universe. So like their logoic counterparts, the Lepika are creators. The logi work with form creation and reanimation. The Lepika with formulating a plan that best suits the evolution of those form-imprisoned jivas. And, you know, up until I refocused on all this, we tend to think of the Lepikas as, the first part of this quote, where they're recorders, analysts, and analysts, not analysts, who record in the astral life, in the book of life. But this further description really gives us an indication of why they're at the level of the great planetary lords themselves, right? Because they project into objectivity the plan, right? And so you can see this connection between the purpose of the planetary logos, as is demonstrated by the Lepikas. Okay. So any thoughts, questions on any of this?
Yeah, you've got a couple. And Veronica says beautiful pictures, just wonderful. To take a trip on the higher planes. And I'm with her. I love those pictures by whatever, somebody Holman.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, they're great.
yeah.
I love this one especially. It's got a great color sense, and I think it deeply describes the idea of the radiating light, of every form, and even the magnetic force. There's just amazing stuff being done out there. Yeah, great stuff. So yeah, and then this one not as profound, but still, people are working with this material and creating these really wonderful images. Yeah.
And then Malia says, I'm sensing the concepts of the great invocation as humanity's role in bringing these concepts into manifestation.
Uh-huh. Yeah, working with a plan. Indeed. Okay. Anything else?
Nope, that's it for now.
Okay. All right, next up, we'll finish the paragraphs. Go get a reader, please.
Yes. Karen, can you read that for us, please?
Okay. The eternal record is no fantastic dream, for we meet with the same records in the world of gross matter. A shadow never falls upon a wall without leaving thereupon a permanent trace which might be made visible by resorting to proper processes, says Dr. Draper. The portrait of our friends or landscape views may be hidden on the sensitive surface from the eye, but they are ready to make their appearance as soon as proper developers are resorted to. A specter is concealed on a silver or a glassy surface until, by our necromancy, we make it come forth into the visible world. Upon the walls of our most private apartments, where we think the eye of intrusion is altogether shut out, and our retirement can never be profaned, there exist the vestiges of all our acts, silhouettes of whatever we have done. Doctors Jevons and Babbage believe that every thought, displacing the particles of the brain and setting them in motion, scatters them throughout the universe, and they think that each particle of the existing matter must be a register of all that has happened. Principles of Science, Volume 2, page 455. Thus, the ancient doctrine has begun to acquire rights of citizenship in the speculations of the scientific world.
Thank you, Karen. Any thoughts or questions about this?
Yes. Well, actually, I think about the paragraph right above it, but are
What's that?
the Lapikas in charge of the dweller on the threshold? And Veronica asks.
Well, the dweller on the threshold is the composite of Maya, glamour, and illusion that has accumulated for any given personality, presenting to the, it only comes forth once one becomes a disciple, because then in their own consciousness, they're beginning to identify with the soul, and the shadow, which is their personality selves, becomes the dweller. Now, so the Lapika aren't directly responsible or creators of it, but they're intimately connected with it, because it is through that Maya, glamour, and illusion that karma is created. So, and therefore it determines, your future sojourn, in manifestation. But yeah, that's, yeah. Anyone else?
Oh, yes, Karen's got her hand up, and then Karsten has a comment. So, Karen, go ahead.
Well, I didn't realize my hand was up, but I was very impressed by this statement. It's like pretty amazing. I mean, you know, you think about you can't really get away with anything. It's true. It's true. And Big Brother is watching you.
Yes,
You know?
fortunately, Big Brother is a Lord of compassion and wisdom, you know.
Yes, yes. Well, I've come to know that, and that's been very, very helpful. But
It
you know,
is, isn't it?
I think it's a bit humorous.
Yes, indeed. Everything leaves a trail, you know, in case if one thinks otherwise, right? Thanks,
Yes.
Karen.
Yeah.
Anyone
Okay,
else?
and yes, Karsten has a comment, and I may have to unmute him to finish it. He says the eagle, Taurus, and the four angels, Michael, Uriel, Gabriel, and which fourth one do you mean, Karsten? I think you're self-muted. Can you? There you go.
Yeah, you see on the lowest page of the page, these are the four immortals which are mentioned in the Atara Veda as the Vachas, or guardians of the four quarters of the sky. See chapter, I can say that. Is that the four? I think of the cherubs, you know, the four faces of God which not can be turned. Or is it the four angels? We have one for each season: Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and I forget Raphael. I think the last one. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they're the four angels, but they're, you know, the thing is, if you think in terms of discrete units of consciousness at this level, it can lead you astray because there is such an overlap, and the consciousness that's being demonstrated is in accordance with the purpose of the plan, right? So the holding of these quarters of the sky is, you could say, that task is done by both these great archangels and by the Lepikas. Now, I can't answer your question directly whether they, you know, if you were to explore the ancient wisdom teachings, if you could find a link by which they are considered to be synonymous, you know. But as I understand it, you know, these archangels belong to that Davic kingdom, and these Lepika lords, well, they don't say, you know, just from what kingdom they emerge. There is some information that suggests that they, in our solar system, are sent to us from Sirius, and that they are the highest consciousness, beings of the highest consciousness in the solar system, except for the solar logos himself. You know, they're akin to the level of the planetary logi. So they're one of our main connections with the soul of our solar system, which is Sirius. It's, you know, it's their emissary.
And also Venus. Venus. Brothers and sisters on Venus.
Yeah. Well, there's going to be, you know, that's part of the connection for sure.
Yeah. That's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anyone else?
Yes, Robert has his hand up. Go ahead, Robert. You're self-muted. There you go.
Thank you. A couple of the earlier remarks gave me an interesting thought, which is that perhaps the big brother in our modern society is the dweller on the threshold of the Akashic Rift.
Well, that's it depends on how you cast the big brother. You know, it's, you know, that has, what you're suggesting has, you know, hints of the 1984 Big Brother, you know, which is a nefarious entity, right? Is overshadowing entity, and in that case, you know, you could say that the dweller of the human kingdom, you know, could be seen as as that is, Big Brother from that point of view. But as Karen was suggesting, that it's those, if you take it to the point of those who know and see all that sentence was all in capital letters, right? Those who know and see all, that you're looking at very high entities indeed, at the level of planetary loci and the initiates at the highest levels. Now, masters of wisdom can consult these records and learn whatever they need to learn. But in terms of simultaneously knowing all that has ever happened, you would be looking at the planetary logos for that.
Yeah, and I wasn't saying that the Akashic records themselves could be seen that way. I was saying that the 1984 version of
right.
our society is a dweller on the threshold of reflection.
It is, yeah, it is. That resonates with me too. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, it has that quality, more than, some surveillance agency at, central control. It is a kind of societal dweller, right?
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Okay,
Thank you for that. Anyone else?
Yes. Carrie says, would you say that the Lapika Lords are equivalent to the Norns weaving humanistic fate in the
Absolutely.
I'm gonna murder the Odinic mysteries?
No, that was good, PL. Odinic. Yeah. Udanic, I guess, is the actual. I had to train myself, but anyway, absolutely. Those are the Norns. That's Norns. And for those of you going, huh? This is the parallel webinar series on the secret teachings of all ages. We've been studying and hopefully discovering something about the Scandinavian mystery school called the Udenic mysteries. And in that, there's this, there are these amazing beings called Norns, Norns, who reside at the well of knowledge, on the banks of the well of knowledge, and weave the tapestries of all that dwell in Yggdrasil, which is the the great tree of life, basically humanity, as well as some other types of creatures like gods and fairies and well, the usual types. Yeah. Yes. So the short answer is yes. I think they're directly related to the Lapika. Thanks, Carrie, for that. Anyone else? Okay. So HPB's quote, it's quite a long quote, from Draper's Conflict Between Religion and Science, comes from a chapter on the phantom images retained by the retina. HPB uses this excerpt to reinforce the idea that the, quote, vestige of all our acts is recorded in the Akashic records. Here's a portrait of John Draper and the title page of his book on the conflict between religion and science. DK says, all is photographed upon the astral light as the human eye receives impressions upon the retina. The same thought is frequently conveyed in the Christian Bible, in the Hebrew and Christian recognition of the all-seeing eye of God, suggesting that the all-seeing eye of God, usually attributed to Shiva, can also be described as a kind of collective eye of humanity. Back to the secret teachings, for those of you who have been following, these webinars, the falcon Vedfulnir, perched atop the world tree Yggdrasil, is the Norse metaphor for this all-seeing eye. Quote, between the eyes of the eagle is the falcon Vedfulnir, whose piercing glance notes all things taking place in the universe. Since esoterically the tree is itself humanity, Vedfulnir can be seen to represent humanity's collective higher vision. Okay, next up, do we have a reader? Could we have a reader?
Carrie, can you read that for us, please?
Yeah, sure.
Thank
The
you.
40 assessors who stand in the region of Amenti as the accusers of the soul before Osiris belong to the same class of deities as the Lipika and might stand paralleled, were not the Egyptian gods so little understood in their esoteric meaning. The Hindu Chitragupta, who reads out the account of every soul's life from his register, called Agra Sadhani, the assessors who read theirs from the heart of the defunct, which becomes an open book before whether Yama, Minos, Osiris, or Karma, are all so many copies of and variants from the Lipika and their astral records. Nevertheless, the Lipika are not deities connected with death, but with life eternal.
Thank you, Carrie. Thoughts or questions? Let's take a look at images of and excerpts on these four terms: assessors, Amenti, Chitragupta, and Agrasandhani. They're all from the Theosophical Glossary. So, could we get a reader?
Yes, Robert, can you read that for us, please? You're self-muted.
So I'll read the name of the papyrus. It's the papyrus of Andi. Some of the 42 judges of Ma'at are visible, seated and in small size. It's from the British Museum in London. Okay, go ahead, please.
Assessors, one name given by Europeans to the 42 judges in the scene of the weighing of the heart in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. They stand as accusers of the defunct before Osiris in the former's progress through Amenti after death. The idea of the judges was reading the record from the weighing of the defunct's heart is a variant of the teaching concerning the Lepikas or karmic scribes recording all things in the astral life.
Thank you. And another reader, please.
Lynn, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. Amenti, Amentent, Egyptian, the underworld, Tuat, the hidden place or secret region. On entering Amenti, Anubis conducts the soul to the hall of Osiris, where it is judged by the 42 judges, assessors, and its heart is weighed against the feather of truth. If the soul passes the test, it goes to the fields of Alu. If the names of the 15 Ats, the 7 arets, circles, the 21 pylons, as well as the gods and guardians of these domains are well known, the deceased is enabled to pass from one mansion to the other, and finally to enter the night boat of the sun, which passes through the Tuat on its way to arise in the heavens. The shades who miss this boat, the unprogressed egos, must remain in the afterworld or Kamaloka, while those who enter the boat are carried to the heaven world, or Devachan, where they wander about until they return to earth for rebirth. This refers to the passing from world to world by the ego proficient in knowledge of the names, and thereafter entering the secret or invisible pathways to the sun. The knowledge of the names indicates spiritual, intellectual, and psychic development by which the ego of the defunct is no longer attracted to the lower spheres, but having knowledge of them correctly answers the challenges and thereafter follows the attraction upwards and onwards.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, a third reader.
I was going to read it, but heck no. Scott, you're much better
Yeah,
at those
our
big
expert.
words than I am. Can you? You're self-muted, Scott. There
Yeah,
you go.
goodness,
Thank you.
I merged in the last round. Let's try this one. Chitragupta, Sanskrit, from Sitar to depict color with various colors, and Gupta, hidden. The secret recorder who paints the picture of the person's life on the astral light. A deva scribe in the abode of the dead, who records human virtues and vices and reads out the account of every soul's life from his register when the excarnate soul arrives in the kingdom of Yama, god of death, a variant of the Lipikas.
And you're doing so well. Why don't you just read this short review?
Okay. Agra Samdhani, Sanskrit, from Agra, foremost, beginning, plus Sam, together, with plus the verbal root of da, to fasten or unite. That which is fastened or strung together from the beginning. The register of human actions kept by Yama, Hindu god of the dead. Linked with Chitragupta, scribe of Yama, who records in the Agra Samadhi, Nani, the deeds and thoughts of every human being.
Thank you, Agrasamdani.
That's the
Yes,
way I was saying.
there it is. So you can see, in each of these cultures, Egyptian and, well, it's focused here on the Egyptian and Hindu traditions. You have that this concept of the Lipika lords is very much present, right? And it's also true in other cultures, versions of this, like, as Carrie brought up, the Norns in the who were recorders of all the deeds in the Scandinavian mystery school. So it's a universal concept, and one has to marvel, as Joe Campbell loved to do, on how there's these spontaneous self-arising of this concept in all these cultures around the world that didn't necessarily communicate with each other, right? It's the spontaneous awareness of the ancient wisdom teachings that comes through those enlightened ones that incarnated for that purpose in each of these cultures. So, okay, good.
Okay, we have a comment here from Mishka. Say the names, the female archangels. Say something about the mother of the world and goddess Prithvi.
I don't know how to respond to that. You just want me to talk about these entities? I think I'd rather stay in context to what we're talking about right now. I did describe this as well as I was able to, the relation to these Lipika lords, these recorders. Certainly, Prithivi, this idea of the Mother Earth, and we'll be looking at that. I think even in this webinar, is going to be deeply connected, with these Lipika, because it is the ground by which literally the Lipikas work their process, that they were able to carry out their karmic purpose, right? I think that's all I can say to that right now. Anyone else?
Yes, Lynn asks, how does Saturn relate to the lords of karma?
Well, it is one of them. It's also the permanent atom of the entire cosmic physical plane, which is at a higher level, but also containing our three, realms of human endeavor. The overlord, the karmic overlord, you could say, certainly for humanity. And, I invite an astrologer to take this further. It's the number 7 is very much connected with Saturn and the idea of cyclic time, the initiating of cyclic time, which is absolutely bound up with the Lapika Lords, the initiating of the plan through the median of cyclic time, and all that is connected with Saturn, and also a kind of proto-Saturn on cosmic levels. I heard some utterance from Scott, I think.
Yeah, he's got his hand up.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't in reference to that.
Oh, okay.
It was something else entirely. Something else.
Okay, hold that thought. And if anybody, is there anybody that wants to address this in terms of BL? You're a Saturn expert. How about you? What do you think? Did you say anything more about that?
No, I think you've covered it. He is related to the Lords of Karma, but I think they're strata, and they're higher than he is. Maybe Nicholas would want to chime in, but it's like everything. There's relationships involved, and there's levels of those relationships and how they go. So.
Right. When you're looking at the particular effect that it has on an individual human being, you're not talking about any kind of direct involvement with Saturn, but the fact of its impress on your birth chart and all astrological charts. It's for instance, your Saturn return, which has a tremendous effect on everyone, indicates its karmic potency, right? Now, even though it's not, what you could call directly involved, its energetic is ever present, right? And thus influential. But you'd have to go to an expert to get more than that. Guess I'll have to. It's not
Okay.
altogether satisfactory, but that's all I can do with it.
And then I have a couple of other comments, and then we'll get back to Scott and his next topic. Okay. First is Brian asked what OTG stands for.
Oh, Online Theosophical Glossary.
Online Theosophical Glossary. Okay.
Now,
And it's put out.
Let me
It's put
finish.
out by the Theosophical Society, right?
I'm not even 100% positive of that. Certainly, I would say, I'd go out on a limb and say yes, though, who actually administers it, whether it's just, a group that belong to or are influenced by the Theosophical Society, or whether it's actually under their auspices, I'm not sure. But I can say this about it, which is that it's like the original Theosophical Glossary, which was a published manuscript, wonderful book, on steroids, because it continues to grow and it accesses a number of different manuscripts and includes them in its definitions. It's an absolutely fabulous source. And all you have to do is Google Theosophical Glossary, and you will get a reference to it. I think it'll be the first one that comes up. And just know that it's distinct from the what the heck? You know what? Here, let's go there. I'll show you how it's important. Okay, so here it is. this is what it looks like. All right, so you have this, every one of these, you know, from AA to ADH is here, and then you have all of these entries, right, on just that. And okay, here are the manuscripts that are involved and that are referenced. All these manuscripts, right, from the Zendavesta at the bottom up to collected writings, right, and you'll see this throughout. You know, like for instance, here you have BG, and you go down here and you find out that BG is the Bhagavad Gita, right? So it's a, if you were to print this out, it would be thousands of pages, you know, not just hundreds. I believe it would be certainly a couple of thousand at least. So it's a go-to source for, you know, any serious student, right? And it's just, so yeah, to answer your question, the theosociety.org, www.theosociety.org/Pasadena. So yes, it is definitely, and here we have this online version and the encyclopedic Theosophical Glossary is a work in progress, right? So it doesn't say that, but yeah, just by the fact of the name of the website, I'd say it's definitely under the direction and auspices of the Theosophical Society. It's one of the best things that they do. Okay, let's get back. Glad you asked that question. It came up many webinars ago, but it's a great source. Okay, next.
And then while you're on this picture, Carrie asks, who is the lady? Gotta love this, Carrie. Who is the lady on the left?
Oh, who's the lady on the left with the
Chopping
fan?
up the bowl of marshmallows.
Oh yeah, well, you know, marshmallows are an intrinsic part of the diet of the Lapika lords, and you can see that he's with his right hand, he's about to bring one to his mouth, and yeah, it brings on that vision. So, and she's the resident marshmallow maker in that hierarchy. So, anything else?
Well, then Scott had his comment.
To be more serious, my guess is that this is a typical family. You know, he's this guy here, Chitragupta. It's the same, you know, it's literally the same illustration brought forward. And my guess is this is sitting among the recently deceased, and that these are families. But you know, I didn't research this to know any more than that. Okay. Yes. Are we up to Scott yet?
I don't know, are we?
Yep.
Okay.
I was just going back to a diagram that I think I made in my book, and you probably did in yours the first time through on this, looking at this particular part of the stanza, and looking at the second 7 who are produced by the 3. And what I have is drawn out as the tetractys. And in the 3 corners, we have word, voice, and spirit, and that leaves the 7 assessors and the rest of the tetractys.
Yeah, it leaves the, you know, the 7, the second 7 and the first 7, you know, so you have the means and the 7 that are produced.
Or yeah, or the other way is to do that is to put those 3, the word, voice, and spirit at the top, and then the 7 Lapika on the lower 4, or 3 and 4 in that tetractys.
Yes, indeed, you could do that. You know, it's almost like, are you on an inner outer paradigm, or are you on a top to bottom
Top
paradigm?
down, right? There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, good stuff. Yeah, and I get into the numbers on this when I analyze this verse, which is coming up after this. But I didn't do the tetractys, so I'm glad to have that.
Are you going to, there's no reason to, but maybe no way to, but to align the 42 assessors with the 40 and the 43, the different numbers they come up with for these beings?
No, I don't. I didn't do that.
No, I don't think there's a way to do it. It doesn't really matter.
Well, also, I'm not sure we have enough information. You know, the one thing I'd say about the 42 is that it adds to 6, which is the manifest. You know, it's the realm of the manifest.
Right. So
And it deals with the manifest. Yeah. But other than that, you know, you're always dealing with partial information, and the real juice is usually hidden away in an upper cupboard, you know?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. On to the final paragraph of commentary on verse 6. Could we get a reader for this last paragraph? It's been a fairly short commentary, actually.
Okay, Malia, would you like to read that for us, please?
Thank you. Starting with connected as the Lipika.
That's correct. Right. Thank you.
Okay. Connected as the Lipika are with the destiny of every man and the birth of every child, whose life is already traced in the astral light, not fatalistically, but only because the future, like the past, is ever alive in the present. They may also be said to exercise an influence on the science of horoscopy. We must admit the truth of the latter, whether we will or not. For as observed by one of the modern adepts of astrology, now that photography has revealed to us the chemical influence of the sidereal system by fixing on the sensitized plate of the apparatus milliards of stars and planets that had hitherto baffled the efforts of the most powerful telescopes to discover them, excuse me, it becomes easier to understand how our solar system can, at the birth of a child, influence his brain, virgin of any impression, in a definite manner and according to the presence on the zenith of such or another zodiacal constellation.
Thank you. Well read. Any thoughts or questions? As many of you know, horoscopy is the science of casting and reading a horoscope. As to the connection, let's see here. There we go. So as to the connection of the lords of karma with, quote, the destiny of every man and the birth of every child, this quote from a treatise on cosmic fire should suffice to give us a brief glimpse of the vastness and intricacy of this connection. Plus, we get more beautiful artwork. Could we get a reader for this?
Michael, can you read that for us, please? Joe, how about you? Oh, there you go, Michael.
Sure. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
No, I don't. I see he's unmuted, but I...
Yep. I had my headset muted. The builders of the human body work under the direction of one of the lords of karma from the lowest group. These lords are to be found in 3 groups, and a lord out of the 3rd group has the work of superintending the builders of the human being on the 3 planes. These various intelligences manipulate the building forces through the medium of streams of energy, which streams are set in motion when the ego sounds his note. It must be remembered that in more or less degree upon his own plane, the ego is aware of his karma and of what must be done to promote growth during the coming incarnation.
Thanks, Michael. Any thoughts about this? Questions? The last half of the paragraph is a statement about the effect of the impress of, quote, milliards of stars and planets upon the brain of every newborn child, like a sensitized photographic plate. Perhaps the most powerful karmic influence impressing itself on the newborn is the energy of Saturn, one of the most potent of the four lords of karma, and who, quote, forces man to face up to the past and in the present to prepare for the future. For such is the intention and purpose of karmic opportunity. So with a few words, DK is able to describe the entire karmic purpose. Okay, finally, the subject of the footnote, Les Mystères de l'Horoscope by Eli Starr, looks to be an interesting read, very colorful cover, but unfortunately I could find no translation from the French. Often happens on these 19th century manuscripts, they just haven't been translated. Since it was published in the same year, 1888, as the Secret Doctrine, HPB's quote from it must have been a late addition to the SD text. So, any thoughts or questions on HPB's commentary on verse 6? Okay. Having considered the commentary, let's take a look at the verse itself. Then the second seven, who are the Lepika, produced by the three, word, voice, and spirit, the rejected son is one. The sons are countless. So first up, then the second seven, who are the Lepika. So the first seven are the 7-in-1 Brahma, called in the SD Oya Ohu the Younger, and in DK's works, the third Logos. In the Secret Teachings webinars, this same 7-in-1 creator deity has appeared in the order of our study as the Druidic Belenus, the Mithraic Zurvan, the Gnostic Primary Eon, the Serapian Serapis, and the Norse Alfadir. The evolution of this creator god is a subject of verse 5 of the same stanza. In this solar system, these seven are the Ray Lords, which, according to DK, are each allied with a, quote, presiding agent of karma, the second seven. For the numerological origin of the first and second sevens, we need to only go back to verse 3 of this same stanza. Quote, then the 3, the 1, the 4, the 1, the 5, the twice 7, the sum total. This 31415, which determines a super-rational function called pi, adds to 14, which is twice 7. So we might surmise that both the first and second groups of 7, the third Logos and the Lepikas, used pi as their externalizing means and method for self-generation. But more can be derived from these numbers. When we add the first 7 numbers together, we get 28, which numerologically reduces to 10. 10 being both graphically and philosophically the circle and the diameter, and is also the 1 in 9 of Svabhavat from verse 5. When we add the second group of 7 numbers together, we get 77, 2 sevens, graphically depicting the second 7 in relation to the first. These 2 sevens add to 14, the sum of 31415, the diameter. So whereas the focus of the first 7 is on the form aspect of the sum total, the circle and the diameter, the second 7 numerically focuses on the relationship between spirit and form, which can be seen as the relationship between pi and the circle. We might interpret this relationship as the plan, which is formulated and upheld by the Lepika Lords, as we discover in this statement from a treatise on cosmic fire. Could we get a reader, please?
Karen, can you read that for us, please?
Yes, the Lepika control the bringing in and the passing out of every life, divine, superhuman, solar, and human, and it is through a consideration of the basic formula for a solar system that the physical plane appearance of a solar logos is controlled and the length of a cosmic pralaya settled.
Thank you, Karen. So next up, produced by the three. These three, which produce the Lepika lords, in which HPB tells us are word, voice, and spirit, are listed in the previous verse as Adi Sanat, the logos, or word, Svabhavat, the voice, and the formless square, which together make up the active elements of the sacred four, who in turn project into objectivity from the passive universal mind the ideal plane of the universe upon which the builders reconstruct the cosmos after every pralaya. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. Next, we have the rejected son is one. This is a tricky one. But before we analyze it, let's reread HPB's commentary on the subject. Can we get a reader for this? We read this a couple of webinars ago.
Lynn, can you read that for us? You're self-muted.
Yes. 8 sons were born from the body of Aditi. She approached the gods with 7, but cast away the 8th, Martanda, our son. The 7 sons called the Aditya are cosmically or astronomically the 7 planets, and the sun being excluded from their number shows plainly that the Hindus may have known, and in fact knew of a 7th planet without calling it Uranus. Thus, the rejected sun, being our sun, evidently is shown above. The sun's sons refer not only to our planets, but to the heavenly bodies in general, himself only a reflection of the central spiritual sun. Surya is the prototype of all those bodies that evolved after him. In the Vedas, he is called Loka Chakshu, the eye of the world.
Thanks, Lynn. So this commentary seems to give us a good reason for the rejected son being one, as stated in the verse. After all, he is the only son among 7 planets and the prototype of all those bodies that evolved after him, meaning, of course, in this solar system. But for me, the phrase that follows the rejected son is one, namely, the son's sons are countless, casts doubt on this interpretation. After all, isn't our son just one of the countless sons of the universe? Given this, what gives him this oneness? What makes him unique? So, alternatively, instead of the one meaning one among 7, we could interpret the one as being the central spiritual son, of which our son is a reflection, and which is the prototype for all sons. But to defend this point of view, we would have to interpret this sentence of the stanza to mean something like, Martanda, the rejected son, is, nevertheless, a reflection of the one central spiritual son. But this seems to me a stretch. At least for me, it's still a mystery as to why our son is one, while all other sons are countless. It's a question of context. If we consider these 2 sentences to be unrelated discrete statements, then there's no problem interpreting the rejected son is one to mean that he is one son among 7 planets. But if we consider the 2 statements as being interrelated, we have a real mystery on our hands. But that's the nature of blinds and of secret knowledge not given until initiation. Any thoughts, questions?
Yes. You have a question from Sri Yanta, The question is the rejected sun the same as the non-sacred solar system?
Well, I don't want to be too quick on this. You know, that's a line of inquiry. The idea of when you say non-sacred, you mean the non-sacred planet that is the physical sun, which hides another planet, right? Presumably a sacred one. I can't completely wrap my mind around that. That is to say, give you a reason why it absolutely would be true. But I think it's a very interesting line of inquiry, because all non-sacred planets could be seen from one point of view, or metaphorically rejected, right? Because they're not as yet part of the true unity. So, I kind of like that. I like that. Thank you for that. Yay, group think, group work. Good. Anyone else?
Yes, Martha has her hand up. Go ahead, Martha.
Thank you. I didn't know quite how to write it. That's why but there's something similar to what I was thinking that was just said by the question before. Is there a possibility that the place of that which is rejected is to set up the necessary duality or polarity for something better? But the question before I was put a little bit better. I think I was thinking of since there's so many solar systems, and our solar system is just one of countless solar systems, now and again, wouldn't it be necessary that one of the so-called 8, all of it being analogical, that there has to be one that stands out or stands apart in order for the next step to be taken?
Well, I think that's the central spiritual sun, which is the true prototype from the pattern from which all solar systems are taken. The question becomes, are there multiple central spiritual suns? See, I think the answer is both yes and no. Yes, in that, it's the higher counterpart, just as we've in our constitution have souls and monads, so do suns, right? They have these higher counterparts. But there is also a unity of expression in those central spiritual suns that unite them together. Because, when you get into this idea of discrete units of consciousness at the higher level, you're on very shaky ground, because they're so interconnected and interrelated in ways we can't really even imagine. So I would say that I am most comfortable with the idea of the one being the central spiritual sun, right? But I'm also now very much enamored of this new idea, which is the rejected sun, as being the physical sun. Unfortunately, the two occur in the same sentence. The rejected sun is one. Well, he can be both. So I hope that helps somewhat. I don't think there's, like a physically extant, what you would call model solar system, from which all other are all others come from or are patterned. I think that patterning comes from these higher levels, the heart of the sun, the cosmic, the central spiritual sun, and even higher levels, cosmic Buddhic plane, etc. Yes, I see another hand. Anyone else?
Yes, Robert. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
another potential way to look at this is the rejected sun is only one, whereas the suns are countless. Now, it seems to be that because there's a capital O in one, that somehow that creates a kind of hierarchy. But on the other hand, you wouldn't write it as with a lowercase, that it's just one. So anyway, that's another way of looking at it, because
that goes back to the idea of, Martanda, who's, sucking up all the vitality of the planets, is rejected, banished to the center of the solar system, by Aditi, the mother aspect, and therefore is rejected, meaning that he is one among 8, who is the only sun standing at the physical center, and that goes along with Martanda being the idea of the non-spiritual visible sun. All that works. The problem I have is that, as long as I said before, as long as you keep your scope in this solar system, I have no problem with this idea. There's only one sun, obviously, right? But if you try to connect it with the second sentence, the one that immediately follows, the suns are countless, and they do seem, in the way that this verse is written, they do seem to be related, then why isn't Martanda, this rejected sun, one of the many other countless sons? So there you have it. Sometimes it's not about solving, it's about
right.
consideration, really considering, and that's, and I appreciate, who, I'm not sure who it was. Was it you, Robert, that's one of you, I can't remember who, said about the idea of the visible sun being rejected, and, and that being because it's not a sacred planet. That's definitely a new consideration, but okay.
There's also,
Okay.
just to say a last thing here, because there's so much in mythology about fallen angels, and it could be that for some reason our solar logos, there's some original sin type thing which we don't understand. It's stepped outside of the suns, which are countless in some way.
Yeah, I have my doubts about that interpretation, just because, you're talking about, then that's suggesting that this solar system is unique, and, it's not a tenable concept, I think that if we try to interpret this on a literal level, we're going to get lost.
Okay.
And in some way we are lost, because we're trying to, and that this has a higher philosophic counterpart that would reveal this. It's like a koan. You could make this a koan, all you monks, go back to your chamber, come back, in April of 2024 and give me the answer, that kind of thing. It really is a seemingly irreconcilable pairing of two sentences, But thanks for your thoughts, Robert.
Sure. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Okay. Yeah, Scott had his hand up, it went down, but I've got a couple of comments from Mishka. Blue sun, and then a long process for planets to become sacred, I think is.
Those are two ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, blue sun to me suggests the sacred sun, right? Very much like, the central spiritual sun. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, and then, right, I think we've considered those ideas. The idea of it's as though, if you don't want to be rejected that you become sacred. You know, that the way of moving from the rejected state is to become sacred, right? And yet there's no satisfactory answer yet that I've heard about this. I think we brought many ideas onto the table. None of them, I'm like moving this Rubik's cube right around, moving it, and I can't get all the colors of the cube on the same sides with the information that we have, which to me points to that there's significant missing information, that we're not privy to. That's what I get from this, and that doesn't actually usually happen. Usually, with enough contemplation, you could at least come up with a lower understanding, if not an ultimate understanding of these verses. But in this case, I'm really stumped. Anyone else?
Well, Scott, did you have something to say? You're self-muted.
Oh, I was just looking back a couple pages here in the book where they have the commentary about the 8 houses from the ancient commentary, and that whole paragraph. It talks about the son living on the sweat of the mother,
right?
Feeding on it, and then following that saying the rejected son being our son. Evidently, the sun's sons refer not only to our planets, but also to the heavenly bodies in general.
That's right. But there's no information there to me that solves this, And I think in a paragraph following that, she says that the sweat is actually is soul substance, right? So you don't get waylaid by these pejorative. I'm talking to everyone, not just you, Scott. But by these pejoratives, because they're often blinds. For instance, he's feeding on the refuge, and you imagine some horror, when in fact it's just by partaking of that which takes it further into form, like for instance, the breath of the soul. I think that's what the description of the refuge was, or of the sweat, one of the two. In a paragraph, you could look, Scott, it's going to be like the next or the following paragraph that he says something like that. So, but see, that could be in itself, could be separative, right? As soon as you partake of the breath of the soul, you're moving out of that homogeneous initial condition, which rejects you from the DT state of homogeneity, right? But I don't think that's enough, because again, that's something that all the sons would do. Any son that who is also a son of a deity, that comes into incarnation, would go through this some similar process. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, not enough information.
There it is.
Talking on different levels. Exactly.
Yeah, and just even to know what level this is, part of the puzzle. Okay. Well, I'm glad for that discussion. Yeah, and especially the idea of rejection and non-sacred, that connection. I like that. Like I said, it's not enough to go, oh, I get it. But at least there's, another puzzle piece up on the table. Okay, so any thoughts or questions on anything having to do with verse 6?
Robert, Scott, a hand up. You're self-muted, Robert.
Following the path, I looked up the encyclopedia that you just brought up, the Theosophical Glossary.
Yes.
And I don't know if you've ever looked it up in there. It says sons. Should I read it?
Yeah, sure.
The rejected son is one. the sons are countless, Secret Doctrine. Our own sun, because of certain cosmic reasons of destiny, was rejected. But the sons, or stars in general, are countless. Our sun is represented in an ancient allegory as being placed in the center of his kingdom, hence rejected, where he turns slowly around himself. Sons refer not only to the planets of the solar system, but likewise to the stars and other heavenly bodies, the term itself holding the key to the ancient teaching. Only a reflection of the central spiritual sun, Surya, is the prototype of all those bodies that evolved after.
Okay, so yeah, I did read that. I remember now.
It sounds like exactly just repeating what we were trying to say.
That's right. Yeah, it's just, it's like, some human being wrote this Theosophical
Right,
Law, right?
right.
And they went through and found every reference and tried to make some sense of it. And read that phrase, certain karmic or cosmic karmic reasons, the rejection, that very first.
Yeah, our own sun, because of certain cosmic reasons of destiny, was rejected.
Well, what does that tell you? Certain
Right.
cosmic reasons of destiny is rejected.
Right.
Well, you could say that there is something, from that you might infer that there is something specific about our sun, that, is makes him the bad boy of the universe. But it's a kind of, isn't it hard to believe, all the sons, especially now what we know that to be literally uncountable beyond trillions and quintillions, that son is the only one rejected. Well, that's, I think, the sum total of the information on it. And I appreciate you reading that. Because,
well, what you said before, that we're all lost, remember that? So why are we all lost? It's because we think we're one. We think we're unique. So anyway, but I'm powerless over trying to solve these things. So I back away. Thank you. It's very stimulating.
yeah, I think the final word on this is it's best to look at this as a koan. And a koan is designed to stimulate your intuition because the answer will not come through lower mind subject object consideration. It does not come as a result of logic within what you could call the rain cloud of knowable things. It requires, a koan does, an upward pitching of one's understanding into a higher understanding, which would then reveal itself. It's the famous one is the sound of one hand clapping, which is it's not possible, so you have to go somewhere else to find the solving of that koan, right? This is, to me, like that. Okay, great discussion.
And then we have a couple of comments from Mishka. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to unmute you, Mishka. So you're self-muted now. So maybe you can clarify. One comment is just serious, and I think that refers back to the earlier comment of blue sun. And then the planet going sacred and it being a long process through humanity's evolution. So like I said, you're self-muted, Mishka. If you want to unmute yourself and clarify a little, or is that all you want?
Or not, if you feel that it's been covered, whichever. But you're right, the blue sun is serious. I missed that reference when you first put it forth. That's definitely the case. Unfortunately, I don't think it solves this particular conundrum.
Okay, not getting unmuted. So you want to go ahead then?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'd like to just finish because we're right at the end of the stanza, and here, we have about 5 minutes left. So where'd I go? My notes just took on a life of their own. Here we go. All right. All right, I'd like to finish this verse and this stanza. We've been on this stanza for quite a while now, with a quote from Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge that specifically references this verse 6 that we've been talking about. Okay. It doesn't solve this last conundrum, but there's some wonderful information here. So could we get a reader, please?
Carrie, can you read that for us, please?
I can try, yeah. What is the relation of the Lipika, the second seven, to the primordial seven, and to the first sacred four?
Okay, I'm going to interrupt Lipika, Terry, just to say that this is a question to HPB from student, and then she's now answering. Okay.
If you believe that any, say the highest initiates, can explain this to your satisfaction, then you are greatly mistaken. The relation can be better understood, or rather shown to be above all understanding, by first studying the Gnostic systems of the early centuries of Christianity, from that of Simon Magus down to the highest and noblest of them, the so-called Pistis Sophia. All these systems are derived from the East. That which we call the primordial seven and the second seven are called by Simon Magus the aeons, the primeval, the second and the third series of siges. They are the graduated emanations, ever descending lower and lower into matter from that primordial principle which he calls fire, and we Svabhavat. Behind that fire, the manifested but silent deity stands with him as it does with us, that which is, was, and ever will be. Let us compare his system with ours. In a passage quoted from his works by the author of Philosophomena, we read, "From this permanent stability and immortality of this first manifested principle, fire, the third logos, which immutability does not preclude activity, as the second from it is endowed with intelligence and reason, Mahat, it, the fire, passed from the potentiality of action to action itself. From this series of evolutions were formed 6 beings, or the emanation from the infinite potency. They were formed in syzygies. That is, syzygies, yeah. That is, they radiated out of the flame 2 by 2, one being active, the other the passive principle. These Simon named Nous and Epinoia, or spirit and thought, Phone and Onoma, voice and name, and Logismos and Entumesis, reasoning and reflection. And again, in each of these 6 primitive beings, the infinite potency was in its totality, but it was there in potentiality and not in act. It had to be established therein through an image, that of the paradigm, in order that it should appear in all its essence, virtue, grandeur, and effects. For only then could it become like unto the parent potency, infinite and eternal. If, on the contrary, it was not conformed by or through the image, that potentiality could never become potency or exercise it. It gets lost for him, just as if he had never had it.
Didn't you miss this line there? Potentiality could never become potency or pass into action.
Oh, yeah. That potentiality could never become potency or pass into action, but was lost for lack of use, as it happens to a man who, having an aptitude for grammar or geometry, does not exercise it. It gets lost for him just as if he never had it.
Philosophemina. So can you imagine you get asked, you ask HPB a question and this is the answer you get?
Yeah.
Yikes. Okay, I did a deep dive into this. It's full of wonderful stuff and we don't have time. So we'll start here next time, which is going to be in December. I believe it's the 20th. Isn't that right, BL?
Yes, 20th of December at 8 p.m. GMT.
Great. And our next Secret Teachings of All Ages is?
6th December at 8 p.m.
So we have a 3-week break for those of you who are doing both webinar series, an extra week in between, and then we get back to it, right? So great. It's, it really is my great privilege to host these webinars, and I hope it's deepening your understanding of this really challenging but illuminated work. So thank you all for participating, and I'll see you next time. So bye
Thank you,
for now.
everyone. Goodbye.